All right, percentages. So this is the next thing that we need to understand now. First of all, how do you find a certain percentage of some number? Let's say you have 80, you want to find 30% of 80. How do you do that? 30 over 100 multiplied by 80, and that should give you the 80% of 30, which is 24%, right? So if you have to find 30%, you do 30 over 100 multiplied by 80. Now, why do we do 30 over 100? 30% means 30 over 100. Percent is sign का मतलब होता है over 100. Okay? So 30% of 80, that means 30 over 100 multiplied by 80. Is that okay? Now that's about a simple percentage, right? P percent of 80, for instance. Percent means P over 100. So you'll say P percent of X is the same thing as P over 100 times X. Okay? 15% of X means 15 over 100 times X, which is 0.15 times X. Okay? Now, sometimes you have to increase something by a certain percentage, and then you have to decrease something by a certain percentage. Let's say you have 150. You want to increase this number by 20%. You have to increase 150 by 20%. Now, how do you do that? Now, one way of doing that is you start with 150 and then you say 150 plus 20% of 150, right? You add 20% of 150 to that, which is going to be 20 over 100 multiplied by 150, and that will give you the result, which is going to be 180. That's one way of increasing something by a certain percentage. Okay? But a lot of times you'll have to do multiple calculations in a single question. So for example, you might have to increase something by a certain percentage and then decrease that by another percentage. This will be too long for that. Okay, this calculation will be too long for that. Now, what's the shortcut if you want to increase 150 by 20%? You do something like this. 150 is going to be multiplied by 1.2. And that will increase it by 20%. Now, where does that come from? Where does 1.2 come from? Your original amount is always considered as the 100%, right? That's your original amount. If you want to increase it by 20%, what should it become? 100% plus 20%. What's that? 120%. 120%. What's percent? Over 100. So 120% is the same thing as saying 120 over 100, and that's 1.2. So you multiply by 1.2. Is that okay? If you want to increase something by 8%, increase something by 8%. What does that mean? 100% plus 8%. What's that? 108%. 108 over 100. What's that? 108 over 100. That's 1.08. So you can just multiply this by 1.08 and that will give you the result. That will increase this number by 8%. Is that okay? So if you want to increase X by P%, in general, we can do something like this. 100% plus P%, right? You'll have to multiply that number by this, whatever that number is. Let's say that's X. You want to increase X by P%, that will mean multiplying X with 100% plus P%. Now what's 100%? 100 over 100. What's p percent? P over 100. And that gives you x into 1 plus p over 100. This is also something that you should keep in mind. Sometimes they don't ask you to increase a number by a percentage, but they give you some variable. That what would be the result if you were to increase it by a certain percentage? You should be able to write it in this form as well. Is that okay? ऐड करने की जरूरत नहीं होगी. So that will be the final result. So if you want to increase, for instance, 150 by 20%, you would just multiply that by 1.2. That will give you 180, and that's your final result after the increase. You don't have to add anything to that. So where is the 1 coming from? You want to increase 150 by how much? 20%. The original amount is 100%. You want to add 20% to that. 100% is 100 over 100. 20% is 20 over 100. That's 1 plus 0.2. So basically, you do 1. 1 is going to give you the original amount, and then you add to that 0.2 into 150. So that simplifies to 150 into 1.2. Is that okay? And this gives you the final result after the increase. Is that okay? No problems? Similarly, you can decrease something using the same idea as well. Let's say you have a number which is 250 now. You want to decrease this number by 15%. Decrease 250 by 15%. What does that mean? That means if the original amount was 100%, you want to subtract 15% from that, which leaves you with 85%, which is the same thing as 0.85. So you can just multiply 250 by 0.85 directly to get your final result. Make sense? So multiplying by 0.85 is going to reduce the number by 15%. And now you can generalize this as well. If you want to decrease something by p%, what do you do for that? You multiply that by 1 minus p%, which is p over 100. You multiply by this. That's exactly what we're doing there as well. We are multiplying by 1 minus 15 over 100, which is 1 minus 0.15, which is 0.85. You should be able to write this in terms of variables like this as well. Sometimes you have to do that. We'll look at some examples. So this is how we can increase something by a certain percentage or decrease something by a certain percentage. Any problems with this? Roma, you're regretting coming to class today? Okay. Let's have a look at this. Let's look at some examples. Among 10th graders at a school, 40% of the students are Red Sox fans. I don't know what this is. It's probably some sports team. 40% of students are this team's fans. Among those fans, 20% are Celtics fans. What percent of the 10th graders at the school are both Red Sox fans and Celtics fans? How do you figure this out? How do you think about this? Do we know the total number of students? We don't know them, right? Let's suppose the total number of students is X. Okay? Let's suppose the total number is X. 40% of the students are Red Sox fans. How do you find 40% of X? What's 40% of X? 0.4x multiplied by 40 over 100, which is zero point 0.4, right? So that's how you can start. You can say multiplied by 40 over 100, and that gives you 0.4 times x. And then out of these Red Sox fans, 20% are Celtics fans. That means 20% of these people. 20% of these people. How do you find 20% of this now? Multiply this by 20 over 100. Multiply this by 0.2. What does that give you? 0.4x multiplied by 0.2, which is going to be 0.08x. Is that okay? So we first find 40% of the total, that's 0.4 into that. Once we have that result, we find 20% of the result, we multiply that by 20 over 100 again. This is the final result that we're getting. X is the total number of students. Now, what percent of the 10th graders at the school are both Red Sox fans and Celtics fans? Can we find that now? 0.08. What does that mean? 8 over 100 times x, that's 8% of the total number. So it should be A. Now, a lot of times, these problems become much simpler if you start with a number. You assume that the total number of students was 100, let's say. Okay? You start with this. If the total number was 100, 40% of that is 40. And then 20% of 40 is 8. And that's what you're looking for, 8%. So instead of x, you can simplify this by using a number like this. Yes. नहीं फिर 8 नहीं आएगा 100 तो 100% total होता है ना. That's why if you start with 100 we get 8. But if you start with another number, what number? 200. If you start from 200, 40% of that is 80, then 20% of 80 is going to give you 16. Then you have to find how much is 16, what percentage is 16 of 200? That will be 8%. Generally, in percentage questions, if you want to start with a number, it's a good idea to start from 100, right? Because the total percentage is 100%. If not, you can start with 1,000 or 10,000. फिर उस ratio से वो calculate करना थोड़ा सा आसान हो जाता है. Yes. So 20% of 0.4x. How do you find that? You multiply this by 20 over 100 again. Is this all right? Okay, let's move on now. The number y is 18% greater than the number x. Which expression represents y in terms of x? Y is greater than x. How much? 18%. A, B, C, C. Does everyone get that? Should be C, right? You increase x by 18%. How do you do that? Multiply it by 1.18. And that will increase x by 18%. So y should equal 1.18x. That is C. All right? Okay. The number y is 35% less than the number x. Which expression represents y in terms of x now? %35 less. How many of you think A? B? It should be B, right? So 35% less means 100% में से you subtract 35%. What's that? 65%. So y is going to be 0.65 times x. That should be b. Okay? Yeah, it's supposed to be less than that, right? So it should have been a decrease. Okay, let's move on. Now, you can chain percentage changes as well. We actually did this in the first and the second example. In fact, the first example that we did, there were two percentages that we were calculating. We first found 40% of something, and then we found 20% of the result. This is called chaining percentage, that we find one percentage, and then using the result, we find another percentage. We can do all of this calculation all at once as well. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. If you want to increase something by 20%, what does that mean? What number do you multiply that with? 20% increase. You multiply by 1.2, right? 100% plus 20%, you multiply that by 1.2. And then you have to decrease it by 25%. 100% minus 25%, that's 75%, that's 0.75, whatever that number is. Let's say you start from x, you can just multiply x by 1.2 and then 0.75, you will get the final result from that. Okay? So 1.2 into 0.75, that means you're increasing it by 20% and then decreasing it by 25%, and that should give you the final result directly. Okay? All right, let's have a look at this. A clothing store sells a jacket for 20% more than its suggested retail price. Using a reward card, a customer purchases the jacket for 25% less than the store price. What percent of the jacket's suggested retail price does the customer pay? How do you think of it? We can start from this, right? This is the reference point, suggested retail price. Eventually, we want to find the final result as a percentage of this, right? Percentage of the suggested retail price. Let's say the suggested retail price is X. Again, if you want to make it easier, you can start with a number. Start with 100, for instance. Let's say the original amount was 100. Or just X. They're selling it for 20% more than the suggested retail price. So what are they selling it at? 1.2 times X. That's the price at which they are selling it at. Okay. Now a customer is using some rewards card and he's purchasing the jacket for 25% less than the price that they're offering. Reduce this by 25%. How do you do that? This was the starting point. 1.2 is increasing it by 20%. Now you want to reduce it by 25%. Multiplied by 0.75. And that will give you some result. You can see what that is. Why would this subtract? This will automatically handle everything, right? When you're calculating 75% of something, you're reducing that thing by 25%. It's already doing the subtraction thing. So 0.75 is basically coming from this 1 minus 0.25, right? What's the result that we get from this? 1.2 into 0.75? 0.9. So we have 0.9 times x. What percentage do you get there? 90%. 90 over 100, that's 90% of x. Is that okay? All right, let's have a look at this. On Monday, Julie received 240 emails. On Tuesday, the number of emails she received was P% less than on Monday. So she received 240 emails on Monday, and then she received P% less on Tuesday. Which expression represents the number of emails she received on Tuesday? Yes? C? Does everyone agree? You're starting from 240. You want to reduce 240 by P%. 100% minus P%. 100% means 1, right? P% means P over 100. So you'll multiply 240 by 1 minus P over 100. That is C. Okay? All right. Let's have a look at this. The value of X is 27 over 20 times the value of Y, where Y is a positive number. The value of X is what percent greater than the value of Y? How many of you have figured this out? Only Malaika? So what are they saying? X is 27 over 20 times the value of Y. So X equals 27 over 20Y, right? What's this number in decimals? Just put that on a calculator. 27 over 20, what do you get? 1.355. What does that tell you? It's 35% greater than Y. X is 35% greater than Y. Okay? So it should be B. All right? Okay. If the number M is 80% less than number N, the number N is 250% greater than 84, what's the value of M? Now, sometimes they use such large percentages, it becomes quite confusing. So make sure that you're using the logic correctly. M is 80% less than N, and N is 250% greater than 84. How do you find M? Now, if you focus on this part, M is 80% less than the number N. M is unknown, N is also unknown. We have two unknowns. But in the second part, it says N is 250% greater than 84. Can we calculate N using this? N is 250% greater than 84. 84 multiplied by what? 2.5? It's 250. So notice the difference. If it says 250%, if it says N is 250% of 84, what would you do there? 84 into 250 over 100, right? If it was 250% of 84, that's not what they're saying. They're saying N is 250% greater than 84. 250% greater than 84. So you have 100% originally, add 250% to that. The final result is 350% of the original. So this would be 84 into 350 over 100, which is 3.5. You would multiply it by 3.5 here. What's that? Okay, let's check that. 84 into 3.5. I think that's too big. 34 into 3.5. 84 into 3.5. Sorry, ये क्या है? 84 into 3.5 to 94. This is n. Now, what is m? M is 80% less than n. You want to reduce something by 80%. What do you multiply it by? 80% less करना है. What does that mean? 100% minus 80%, that's 20%. So you multiply it by 0.2, 0.2 into 294, that gives you 58. That should be the value of m. Okay? So we first find n by increasing 84 by 250%, right? So 100% plus 250%, that's 350%. We multiply by 3.5. Once we have the value of n, we need to reduce it by 80%. That means multiplying by 0.2. Okay? It's very important to understand the difference in these statements. If they say 80% of something, that means you do 80 over 100 into that number. If you want to reduce something by 80%, that means you need to multiply that by 20%. You need to subtract 80% from that. Okay? All right, let's move on. Now, this is a relatively trickier case. The chickens on a farm laid 30% more eggs this year than last year. If they laid 5,200 eggs this year, how many eggs did they lay last year? What's your base value? The base value is last year, right? That is unknown. We don't know what that is. How many eggs did they lay last year? That is what we want to figure out. We can call that X. This year, we had 30% more eggs as compared to last year. So if last year the number was X, what should it be this year? Increase X by 30%. How do you do that? X into 1.3. This should equal 5,200. So when you have the original amount unknown, it's better to form an equation like this and then find the value of the unknown. In this case, the original amount was unknown, right? We did not know the starting point. So we called that X and we said X should be increased by 30%. That means X into 1.3. That should give you 5,200. And you can find the value of X from this. What's that? Exact 4,000? Okay, so X is 4,000. That's what the number of eggs was last year. Okay? Now, this is important to remember from this example. If X is, let's say, 50% greater than Y, that's not the same thing as saying Y is 50% less than X. Why is that? X is 50% greater than Y. What does that mean? X is equal to 1.5 times Y. Y is 50% less than X. That means Y is equal to 0.5X. That's not the same thing. The base is different in both of them. In the first case, the percentage that we're calculating is of Y. In the second case, the percentage that we're calculating is of X. If the base changes, the percentage is going to be different. 50% of X is different from 50% of Y. They do not mean the same thing. Okay? So if you were to make X the subject here, for instance, just to compare the two, you would get X equal to 2Y. And that's clearly not the same as this. They're not equivalent. Okay? Okay. So just 2 or 3 more examples and then we end. The number of students at a school decreased 20% from 2010 to 2011. If the number of students enrolled in 2011 was K, which of the following expresses the number of students enrolled in 2010 in terms of K? Take 30 seconds, everyone. Tell me which option it should be. How many of you think it should be 0.8K? Anyone getting 0.8K? No? उन्होंने options ऐसे दिए हैं कि it's obvious that there's only one possible correct answer. If you had 0.8K there, that would have become slightly more confusing. C? Oh, okay. No. So, yeah, you're right. So I was thinking of it the other way around. Is it C? How many of you are getting C? Okay, so how do you think of this? The number of students is decreasing from 2010 to 2011. What do we want to find out at the end? The number in 2010. Okay. If the number in 2010 was, let's say, X, decrease it by 20%. What do you have to multiply it by? To decrease it by 20%, 0.8. X into 0.8 should equal K, because that's the number in 2011. What does X become? K over 0.8, which is going to give you 1.25K. And that should be C. Is that okay? So you see, it says the percentage decreased by 20%. It does not mean that you would just write 1.2 there by adding 20%, because the base is 2010 here. Base is not 2011. You're not going to increase 2011's number by 20%. You would instead take X as the base, decrease that by 0.8, and that gives you K as a result. And from that, you get X equal to K over 0.8, which gives you 1.25 times K. Put that on a calculator, 1 over 0.8. 1 over 0.8, put that on a calculator, that should give you 1.25. Okay? All right. Sometimes you have to calculate percentage change, right? The amount changes from one number to another number, and you have to calculate what is the percentage change. So let's say something changes from 20 to 25. How do you find that percentage change? New number minus the old number divided by the old number. Base, the denominator is always the old number, the original number. Okay? So if the number is going from 20 to 25, in the numerator you have 25 minus 20. In the denominator you have the original number, which is 20, into 100%, and that gives you 25% in this case. Now, if the change turns out to be positive, that means it's a percentage increase. If this change turns out to be negative, that means it's a percentage decrease. Is that okay? Let's take this example. Let's say we have the number of TVs sold during the first week, that was 685, and the number sold during the second week was 500. The number of TVs sold during the second week was what percentage less than the first week? Percentage change find करनी है. What's the formula for that? New value minus the old value divided by the old value. In the second week, the number is 500. So we say 500 minus 685. The denominator is going to be 685, the original value. That's what the denominator is. Into 100%, you can see what that is. What's this number? Minus 27. Okay, so let's say 27%, round off करके, that's what you get, minus 27%. Now it's a decrease. They're saying in the second week, how much less was it than the first week? So this word less already incorporates the negative sign. You would just write 27 there. That's your answer. Okay? Make sense? So percentage change is calculated as new value minus the old value divided by the old value into 100%. Last example. One last example. Okay. 200 is X% greater than 50. 200 is X% greater than 50. What's the value of X? Yes? 200 is X% greater than 50. What's the percentage change formula? We're looking for percentage change, right? How much percentage greater is one value than the other? 200 minus 50 divided by 50 into 100. What do you get from that? 300%. So it's 300% greater than 50. Okay, so what's the value of X then? What value would you write there? It's a fill-in question. What value are we going to write there? 300% or just 300? It says X%. So percentage sign is separate. X is just the value. X is equal to just 300. 300% means 0.3. Sorry, not 0.3. It means 3. Okay? Do not write 300% there. That will not be correct. Just write 300 because percentage sign is separate from X. Okay? So that's how we deal with percentages.